Who said that walls can't speak? If you find yourself on Farmington Avenue in the city of Hartford, Connecticut, a building will appear before you that seems to scream. This is not just a mansion. It is an architectural hallucination frozen in red brick. 19 rooms, 5 bathrooms, whimsical turrets, carved balconies, and patterns reminiscent of embroidery on the vest of an eccentric gentleman. Contemporaries passing by this building in 1874 stopped in bewilderment. One of the local reporters noted that this structure looks as if a medieval fortress collided with a steamboat and cuckoo clocks fell on them from above. Tourists today see in this house a monument to literary genius, a symbol of the American dream and coziness. They pay for entry to see the library where the funniest pages in the history of American literature were written. But they do not see the main thing.
They do not see that this house was not only a cradle of creativity, but also a golden cage, a financial black hole that slowly, year after year, sucked the life out of its creator. The story we're used to hearing sounds like a sweet fairy tale. A poor boy from the banks of the Mississippi becomes the world's most famous writer, marries a rich heiress, and builds the castle of his dreams. But the truth, hidden in accounting books and personal letters, is much darker and more dramatic. This house was built on a foundation of ambitions and fear. Fear of becoming nobody again. Fear of returning to poverty. Every brick laid, every Tiffany stained glass window, every carved fireplace. This was not just a demonstration of taste. It was a desperate attempt to prove to the elite society of New England that a rough reporter from the West was worthy of sitting at the same table with kings and magnates. We look at photographs of smiling Mark Twain in a white suit, but forget that beneath this mask hid Samuel Clemens, a man who couldn't sleep at night, calculating the monstrous debts generated by this very splendor. To understand the scale of this drama, one needs to grasp one figure. In those years, when a skilled worker could consider earning $500 a year a stroke of luck, and a decent house cost around $2,000 or $3,000, Samuel Clemens spent more than $70,000 on the construction and furnishing of this mansion. Translate this into modern money, multiply by the social pressure of that time, and you will begin to feel the weight that fell on the writer's shoulders. This was not an investment. It was a manifesto. But a manifesto of what? Genius or madman? None of the guests who raised crystal glasses in his dining room suspected that the host of the house was playing a dangerous game with fate. It seemed impossible that a man earning thousands of dollars for one lecture could stand on the brink of bankruptcy. It seemed unthinkable that this house, filled with the laughter of 3 daughters and the love of his adored wife, would become the stage for the most terrible tragedy in the writer's life. A tragedy after which he would forbid himself even from approaching this place. We are used to thinking of Mark Twain as a cheerful storyteller, but this house remembers another man, furious, depressed, seeking salvation in dubious inventions just to pay the bills for this palace. Why did he do this? Why did a man who mocked human vanity build a monument to his own ego? The answer lies not in the architecture, but in the psychology of a man who spent his entire life fleeing the ghost of a hungry childhood. Samuel Clemens was not just building a house. He was building a fortress that was meant to protect him from the past. But he overlooked one thing.
The most dangerous enemies are not outside the walls, but inside them. And sometimes that enemy becomes your own dream. Welcome to the house that Mark Twain built, the house that gave the world Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, the house that nearly destroyed its creator. To understand how this Gothic fairy tale turned into a financial nightmare, We need to rewind time back. We need to leave wealthy Connecticut and head to where it all began, to the dusty, poor towns of Missouri, where little Sammy Clemens first realized money is not just coins. Money is the only protection from the cruelty of the world. It was there, in the mud and poverty, that the first stone of this majestic and tragic mansion was laid. The journey into the abyss of his ambitions begins right now. Samuel Langhorne Clemens came into the world on the 30th of November, 1835, on the day when Halley's Comet streaked across the sky over the tiny village of Florida in the state of Missouri. This cosmic portent promised greatness, but the reality that greeted the boy smelled not of stardust, but of dampness, cheap tobacco, and despair. To understand why, 40 years later, this man would erect a pompous mansion in Hartford, one needs to look into the eyes of his father, John Marshall Clemens. This stern, never-smiling man was the living embodiment of American failure. He was a judge, a merchant, a land speculator, but every one of his ventures inevitably crumbled to dust. The main ghost in the Clemens house was not death, but the Tennessee land. 75,000 acres bought by the father for pennies in the hope that one day they would make the family fabulously rich. In Samuel's childhood, this land was both the family prayer and the family curse. The father instilled in him a dangerous idea. True wealth is not earned through daily labor. It falls on your head like luck, like a miracle, like the result of one brilliant deal. Little Sam grew up with the conviction that he was a deferred millionaire. This psychology of waiting for the golden rain would become the very virus that, decades later, would make him invest fortunes in mad inventions sitting in his Gothic study. In 847, the catastrophe became reality. The father died of pneumonia, leaving the family in poverty. Sam was only 11 years old. His childhood ended at the moment when he saw his father's body through the keyhole during the autopsy. A shocking detail that he would carry through his entire life. School was abandoned. The boy stepped up to the printing press. It was here, in the smell of lead and printer's ink, that his first survival strategy began to form. He realized that words have weight. Words can be a commodity. But for now, he was just a penniless apprentice who had to wear hand-me-down clothes too big for him and sleep on the floor in the newspaper office. Sam's youth was spent in pursuit of status. He became a pilot on the Mississippi, an elite caste of that time. Pilots earned fabulous money. They were respected more than captains. Sam learned every bend of the great river, every stump hidden underwater. This was a metaphor for his future worldview. Look at the smooth surface, but see the hidden threats. Mark Twain is not just a pseudonym. It is a navigational term meaning 2 fathoms, safe depth. But for Sam, there was no safe depth. The Civil War destroyed river traffic, and he found himself at the bottom again. Then he rushed to the west, to Nevada, gripped by silver fever. He dug the earth, got sick, starved, but found not an ounce of silver. But he found something more valuable. He discovered that people are willing to pay for lies if they are beautifully packaged. He began writing reports full of sarcasm, inventions, and biting truth about human nature. From an unsuccessful prospector was born Mark Twain, a cynical observer who laughed at what others feared. By the end of the 60s of the 19th century, he arrived on the East Coast, and it was here that the main social conflict of his life unfolded, without which it is impossible to understand the architecture of his future home. The east of the USA at that time, this was Boston and New York, this was old money, Puritan morality, restraint, Latin and tea ceremonies. Mark Twain burst into this world like a hurricane, He was rough. He wore strange sealskin coats. He smoked cheap cigars, swore, and told stories that made noble ladies' ears turn red. He was an outsider, an upstart. But this upstart was devilishly clever. He understood. To beat the system, one must become part of it, but on one's own terms. He craved recognition not as a saloon humorist, but as a gentleman. It was not enough for him to be read. He wanted respect from those very people who looked down on him. In his soul, two men struggled. The rebel who despised the hypocrisy of the rich, and the ambitious provincial dreaming of his own palace. It was this inner schism that defined his philosophy of success. He decided to buy a ticket into high society. But he was not going to knock quietly on the door. He was going to kick it down. He needed an ally. He needed a guide into the world of the elite, a person who would wash the coal dust from his biography and turn Wild Sam into respectable Mr. Clemens. And he found that person. Or rather, he saw her face on an ivory miniature, and in that same second, his survival strategy turned into a conquest strategy. Fate was preparing a meeting for him that would change his life forever and lead to the construction of that very house, which would become his triumph and his curse. He did not yet know that the price of entry into this world would be measured not in dollars, but in pieces of his own soul. The face that changed everything was captured on a tiny ivory plate. Samuel Clemens first saw Olivia Langdon not in person, but in a miniature that her brother Charles showed him during the voyage on the steamship Quaker City. It was 1867. For the rough journalist, reeking of tobacco and river mud, this portrait was a revelation. Olivia, or Livy as those close to her called her, was not just a beautiful 22-year-old girl. She was the daughter of Jervis Langdon, a coal magnate from Elmira, New York State. She was the embodiment of Eastern elite. Educated, deeply religious, fragile, she had suffered a severe spinal injury, and impeccably bred. She was everything that Sam was not. And that is precisely why he decided that she must become his wife. This was not just infatuation. This was a military campaign to capture an impregnable fortress. When Samuel first appeared at the Langdons' mansion in Elmira, it looked like the invasion of a barbarian into a temple. The Langdon family was horrified. Who was this man with a wild mane of hair, a strange accent, and a dubious reputation? Jervis Langdon, a pragmatic and stern man, demanded letters of recommendation. Samuel, confident in his charisma, gave addresses of his acquaintances from the West. The responses that came could have destroyed any other suitor. Friends wrote that Clemens was a drunkard, blasphemer, a man born to be hanged, and absolutely worthless element. At that moment, the first major turn in the fate of the future house occurred. Jervis Langdon, after reading these damning letters, looked into Sam's eyes and asked, "Do you have even one friend who will say a good word about you?" Clemens, without batting an eye, replied, "It seems not, sir." This disarming honesty paradoxically saved him. The Coal King saw in the former pilot a backbone that money couldn't buy. In February of 1870, the wedding took place. It was the merger of two galaxies, the untamed energy of the frontier and the respectable capital of the East Coast. This marriage became the foundation on which the house in Hartford would later grow. Livy became not just a wife, she became his chief editor, censor, and, as Twain himself called her, a gravitational controller. She crossed out swear words from his manuscripts, taught him how to dress and behave at the table. Thanks to the Langdons' money and Livy's influence, Samuel Clemens received a pass to the major leagues. In 1871, the young family moves to Hartford, Connecticut. The choice of location was strategic. Hartford at that time was the richest city in America per capita, but the Clemens settled not just in the city, but in the Nook Farm district. Nook Farm. This was an elite enclave of intellectuals, a Victorian version of Silicon Valley, only instead of technology, literature and theology reigned here. Their neighbor became Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, the most famous woman in America at that time. Settling here meant declaring to the whole world, "I am their equal." In 1873, the Clements buy a plot of land on Farmington Avenue, and here the real magic of architecture begins. For the creation of their masterpiece, they hired architect Edward Tuckerman Potter. Potter was known for his churches, and this was no accident. Twain did not want just a house. He needed a cathedral dedicated to family happiness and his own success. The design process began, in which the characters of the spouses strangely intertwined. Livy sketched the initial draft. She wanted coziness, warmth, a place where children could be raised away from the city hustle. Samuel wanted drama. He wanted to shock the bourgeoisie. The result of their joint work with the architect became the physical embodiment of their marriage. The house that began to grow on the hill was built of red brick decorated with a black pattern, a tribute to seriousness and traditions, the influence of Livy and her money. But the form of this house was pure Mark Twain chaos. 19 rooms arranged on 3 levels, a multitude of balconies, turrets, unexpected turns of corridors. Twain asked the architect to make the windows in the billiard room face directly onto winter landscapes, like paintings in frames. In this structure, the old world met the new. On one side, Gothic arches reminiscent of medieval European castles. On the other, cutting-edge technologies, a complex heating system, plumbing, and, most surprisingly, orientation toward maximum use of natural light. This was no longer just a house. It was a declaration of independence. Twain seemed to say to his neighbors, conservative Yankees, "I will live among you, but I will not be like you." He built his fortress with its back to the street and its face to the river, demonstratively turning away from the society whose recognition he so craved. In 1874, when the walls were already rising above the trees, no one could have guessed that this architectural audacity would become a funnel sucking in millions. They moved into the unfinished house, full of hopes. Livy was pregnant. Samuel was at the peak of popularity after the release of the book The Gilded Age. It seemed that life was an endless ascent upward. But it was precisely at that moment, when the Clements carriage first entered the gates on Farmington Avenue, that the trap's mechanism snapped shut. Samuel Clemens had built a stage worthy of a king, and now he had to play the role of a monarch, even if the treasury was emptying day by day. Greatness demanded sacrifices, and the house had already opened its insatiable maw. When you crossed the threshold of the Clemens house in 1881, the world of Victorian restraint remained outside. Inside, you were greeted not just by luxury, but by a real psychological labyrinth. After the interiors were completely reimagined by the group Associated Artists, which included the young Louis Comfort Tiffany, the hall turned into a shimmering Alibaba's cave. The walls and ceilings were covered with a complex geometric ornament applied with silver paint, which, in the light of gas jets, shimmered like the scales of an exotic fish. This was the first psychological frontier. The guest had to immediately understand that the master of this house was not just a rich Yankee, but a citizen of the world, a man with exotic taste and boundless imagination. Moving deeper, you entered the heart of the house, the library. This room, paneled with dark oak, was the physical embodiment of Mark Twain's soul. The central place here was occupied by a massive carved fireplace that Samuel bought in Scotland, in Ayton Castle, and transported across the ocean. Above the hearth hung a brass plaque with a quote from Emerson: "The presence of a guest is the presence of God." But the real magic happened not in quotes, but on the mantelpiece. It was crowded with a multitude of knickknacks, and every evening Twain's daughters, Susie, Clara, and Jean, demanded a new fairy tale from their father.
The rule was strict. He had to start the story with the object on the left edge of the shelf, and, without interrupting the narrative, weave in every figurine until he reached the right edge. It was here, under the crackle of logs, that the very voice of the storyteller was born, which would conquer millions. The dining room, adjacent to the library, hid another detail revealing the character of the master. Above the fireplace, where mirrors or ancestral portraits are usually hung, Twain ordered a window to be cut. This was an unprecedented architectural solution. He explained it simply. He wanted to see the flames in the fireplace and the falling snow outside the window at the same time. He needed this visual conflict, warmth and cold, coziness and elements, life and death, in one frame. This window was a metaphor for his creativity, where laughter always neighbors tragedy. Here, at the long table, the best minds of the era gathered. William Dean Howells, actor Edwin Booth, British explorer Henry Stanley. And this entire orchestra was conducted not by Samuel, but by his butler, George Griffin. A former slave who became the writer's trusted confidant, Griffin was the one who actually controlled the flow of guests and, according to rumors, often lent money to the master when he forgot his wallet. Their relationship, full of mutual respect and irony, broke all racial stereotypes of the time. But to see the true forge of masterpieces, one had to climb to the third floor. The billiard room. The holy of holies. Unlike the feminine, cozy first floor, masculine chaos reigned here. In the center stood a billiard table, a gift from a wealthy admirer, which on Fridays became a battlefield. Twain and his friends played until the deep night, and the room was so filled with cigar smoke that, according to eyewitnesses, the players' figures seemed like ghosts in the fog. Twain smoked up to 40 cigars a day, and the smell of tobacco permeated every portiere in this room. It was here, in the corner of the billiard room, that his desk stood. It was turned to the wall so that nothing, not the view from the window nor the billiard game, would distract the writer. Absolute disorder reigned on this desk, which the servants were forbidden to touch under threat of dismissal. Manuscripts lay in piles. It was in this room, amid clouds of tobacco smoke, under the clack of billiard balls, that The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, The Prince and the Pauper, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, and the great Adventures of Huckleberry Finn were written. This third floor was a factory. Piano sounds and children's laughter rose from below, while up here, Samuel Clemens turned ink into gold. Each of the 19 rooms in this house performed its function in the complex ecosystem of the Clemens family. The conservatory with a fountain brought nature inside, creating the illusion of eternal summer. The master's bedroom with the huge bed that Twain bought in Venice and slept in it feet toward the headboard to admire the carving, was an island of peace. There were 7 servants in this house, including coachman Patrick McAleer, who served the Twains for 35 years. It was a small state where Samuel was a constitutional monarch and Livy was the prime minister. It seemed that this house breathed. It was filled with life. Home performances in the library,
where Twain played the role of a lovelorn knight. Endless cats wandering the corridors. Twain adored cats and gave them ornate names like Apollinaris. Noisy, formal dinners, the cost of which sometimes exceeded the annual income of an average American. But behind this facade of cloudless happiness and creative triumph, a dark shadow was already beginning to grow. Maintaining such a state required colossal funds. The house consumed money at the same speed as the furnace consumed coal. $30,000 a year went just to sustain the lifestyle, a sum unthinkable for a writer, even a genius. The walls adorned by Tiffany and fireplaces from Scottish castles began to demand sacrifices. Twain felt that literary royalties were no longer enough to feed this architectural monster. He needed a big score. He needed a miracle that would forever free him from the need to count money. And in search of this miracle, he made a fatal mistake. While on the third floor the history of literature was being written, in the subconscious of the master, the mechanism of a bomb was already ticking, which would blow up this ideal world. And the name of this bomb was the Page typesetting machine. In the basements of the Colt factory in Hartford, just a few miles from the cozy library with the fireplace, a monster was growing. It had no flesh and blood. It consisted of 18,000 steel parts, but its appetite was truly devilish. This was James Page's typesetting machine, an invention that was supposed to revolutionize printing by replacing the manual labor of typesetters. For Mark Twain, this was not just an investment. It was his ticket to the world of billionaires, his chance to become a new Rockefeller or Carnegie. He was obsessed with the idea that one machine would replace 4 men. He called it a mechanical miracle. But in reality, this miracle was a mechanical vampire that latched onto the writer's bank account. Here begins the deep moral ambivalence of our story. The great humanist, the man who in his books defended the weak and mocked greed, in real life was blinded by the shine of gold. He spent $3,000 a month on improving the machine, exactly as much as maintaining his luxurious mansion cost. Imagine these scales. On one side, family well-being, daughter's education, beloved wife Livy's peace of mind. On the other, a capricious mechanism that broke every time they tried to demonstrate it to investors. The irony of fate was cruel. In those same years, a man named Alexander Graham Bell came to Twain. He offered the writer to buy a share in a new invention, the telephone, for pennies. Twain, considering himself a great visionary, laughed and refused, stating that this box was of no use to anyone. Instead, he continued to pour millions in today's money into Page's machine. This was a moment of hubris for which he had to pay with years of humiliation. By the beginning of the 90s of the 19th century, the atmosphere in the ideal house had changed. Outwardly, everything remained the same. Formal dinners, laughter in the billiard room, games with daughters. But the air became heavy with anxiety. Livy Clemens, this fragile woman who was the family's moral compass, began to falter. She saw the bills. She knew that they were not just living beyond their means, they were living on the edge of an abyss. Samuel, suffering from insomnia, wandered at night through his luxurious corridors, realizing that the walls he had erected as protection now pressed down on him. The house had begun to demand too much. It had turned from a symbol of success into a monument to his financial insolvency. The turning point arrived, the moment when the dream collided with reality and shattered to pieces. The family made a decision that was presented to the outside world as a trip to Europe for health reasons. But the truth was humiliating. They were fleeing. Life in Hartford, with its servants, heating, taxes, and receptions, had become unaffordable.
To save the remnants of their fortune, they needed to close the house, dismiss the staff, and leave for places where life was cheaper. Berlin, Paris, Florence. June 6th, 1891. Remember this date. It was the day the fairy tale ended. Try to imagine this scene. Servants cover the furniture with white dust covers, like shrouds. Statues are draped with cloth. The echo of footsteps in the empty corridors sounds frighteningly loud. The windows, from which Samuel loved to gaze at snow-covered firs, are shuttered. The house plunges into darkness. The most tragic figure on this day was the eldest daughter, 19-year-old Susie. She loved this house more than anyone. For her, it was not just a building, it was her world, her kingdom. She, a sensitive and talented girl who had begun writing her father's biography at 13, sensed disaster. On that day, when the carriage pulled up to the porch to take them to the station, Susie wrote in her diary lines full of pain. "We are leaving our home, and I have a feeling that we will never live here all together again." They left, thinking it was temporary. Samuel assured Livy that he would quickly set things right. The page machine would finally work, and they would return as triumphators. He was lying to her. And, worst of all, he was lying to himself. When the carriage set off down Farmington Avenue, Samuel Clemens looked back at the brick towers of his creation for the last time. He watched as the house disappeared around the bend. He did not know that for him, this house died in that very second. The moral conflict reaches its peak here. Was Twain a victim of circumstances? No. He was the architect of his downfall, just as he was the commissioner of this house. His ambition to build a palace to prove his worth forced him to risk everything. He wanted to be a king, but became a prisoner of his own kingdom. The house in Hartford, created for happiness, became the cause of their exile. They went to Europe, where Twain, the great writer, turned into a hunted beast. He wrote letters to friends full of bitterness, calling himself a pauper. But the worst was yet to come. The house stood empty. 5 years it waited for its owners. 5 years of silence in the library where laughter had once resounded. But when the doors of this house would open again for the Clemens family, it would not be a joyful return. It would be the finale of a Greek tragedy, where fate overtakes the hero at the most unexpected moment. Fate was preparing a blow that would make the financial losses seem like minor inconveniences. The shadow of death already stood on the threshold, waiting for someone to turn the key in the lock. 1894 became the year when the sky finally fell to earth for Samuel Clemens. The page typesetting machine, this mechanical Moloch into which the writer had poured the life juices of his family for 14 years, lost the battle. A simpler and cheaper linotype entered the market. This was the end. $300,000, a sum equivalent to millions today, evaporated. The great Mark Twain, the man whose name every literate soul knew from London to Melbourne, was bankrupt. Here, the story makes a sharp turn, introducing a new character who changes the rules of the game. Into the life of the broken writer enters Henry Huddleston Rogers. This was a figure of epic scale, one of the leaders of Standard Oil, Rockefeller's right-hand man, a person whom the press called the hellhound of capitalism. What could a ruthless oil magnate and a humanist writer have in common? But Rogers was a fan of Twain. He took control of the writer's finances in his iron hands. Rogers proposed a simple scheme: declare bankruptcy, give creditors cents on the dollar, and live peacefully. It was legal, It was reasonable. That was how all businessmen of that time acted. But here a deep inner transformation of the hero occurs. Samuel and Olivia Clemens make a decision that seems insane from an economic point of view, but the only correct one from the standpoint of their moral code. They decide to pay everything, every cent, a debt of honor, to save his name and, more importantly, to save his house in Hartford. The 60-year-old sick old man embarks on a round-the-world lecture tour. This was not a fun trip. This was a death march. Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa. Twain suffered from carbuncles, colds, and exhaustion. He hated these performances, calling them gesturing on the grave. But each time, stepping onto the stage and eliciting laughter from the audience, he mentally crossed out another debt. He was fighting for the right to return home, for the right to light the fireplace in that very library again. By the summer of 1896, the miracle had happened. The money was collected. The debts were almost paid off. The family, which was in England, was preparing for a triumphant return to America. Livy and Samuel rented a house in Guildford, near London, awaiting the arrival of their daughters, Susie and Jean, who remained in the States. It seemed that redemption was complete. The house in Hartford was waiting for them. But fate, a cruel playwright, had saved the most terrible blow for last. Twain's beloved daughter, 24-year-old Susie, the very one who was the soul of the Hartford house, was in that very mansion at that moment. She had returned there, preparing to sail to Europe, but instead of a trip to the port, she took to her bed. The doctor's diagnosis sounded like a death sentence: spinal meningitis. Imagine this empty, echoing house in the hot August of 1896. Windows shuttered, furniture in dust covers, and in the midst of this majestic desolation, in the room upstairs, a young girl is dying. There was no father or mother with her, only the faithful servant Katie Leary was with her. In delirium, Susie called for her mother. She was going blind, losing her mind, thrashing on the huge redwood bed. That very house, built as a fortress of happiness, turned into a torture chamber for her. Samuel and Livy in England received telegrams, first alarming, then reassuring, then terrifying again. Distance and slow communication played a fatal role. Livy boarded a ship urgently, trying to make it in time. Samuel stayed in London to look after their other daughter, Clara. On August 18th, Susie died. She died in that very house that her father had tried to save at the cost of his health. When the news reached London, Mark Twain was destroyed. But the most terrible revelation awaited him ahead. He realized that his struggle for the house had lost all meaning. A house is not bricks, not Tiffany's stained glass windows, and not carved oak. A house is people. With Susie's departure, the soul of the mansion on Farmington Avenue left it forever. The hero's transformation ended tragically. Twain wanted to regain his status and wealth, but gained only the wisdom of a man who had lost everything. In his letters of that period, he writes about the house as a living being that had died. "The spirits of the dead have taken possession of it," he would say later. He forbade himself from returning there. He could not bear the thought of walking through the corridors where the echo holds the death rattles of his beloved daughter. The crisis led to a complete reevaluation of values. All ambitions, all desire to impress the neighbors, all these endless expenditures on decor and additions, now all this seemed not just meaningless, but criminal.
If he had not chased money, if they had not left for Europe, they would have been there. The house, which had been a symbol of his success, became a monument to his greatest life failure, the failure of a father who could not protect his child. The mansion stood closed for another 7 years. It was decaying. The garden was overgrown. People passed by and whispered about a curse. In 1903, the house was sold. The sale price was $28,000. Remember, he had spent more than $70,000 on it, not counting the endless repairs. He sold his dream for a pittance because it was worth nothing more to him. However, it was precisely in this abyss of grief that Twain found a new, somber strength. He stopped being just a humorist. In the last years of his life, he wrote his deepest, most philosophical, and bitterest works. The Mysterious Stranger, treatises on religion and morality, all this was born from the ashes of the Hartford tragedy. He stopped trying to please the elite. He became a prophet, denouncing the hypocrisy of that very world he had so strived to enter. Having lost his earthly home, he began to build his true legacy, an intellectual one that does not depend on mortgages and stock market crashes. But the price of this insight was unbearably high. The story of the house ended, but the story of its ghosts was just beginning. Today, as you walk along Farmington Avenue, house number 351 no longer looks like a lonely outcast. It is surrounded by a well-kept garden, and tens of thousands of tourists pass through its doors every year. It has become a museum, a national shrine, a pilgrimage site for those seeking inspiration. Guides in uniform lead groups through those very rooms where Susie's laughter once resounded, and where Mark Twain, amid clouds of smoke, created his worlds. Visitors admire the stained glass windows, take photos against the red brick background, and buy souvenirs. But most of them miss, perhaps, the most important lesson that these walls hold. This house is not just a monument to literature. It is the most expensive and beautiful textbook on the psychology of success and the price we pay for our ambitions. The story of this mansion could have ended as tragically as the story of its owner's life in this place. After the sale in 1903, the building passed from hand to hand. It was a private school, a multifamily house, a library. By 1927, a real threat of demolition hung over it. Developers, these eternal enemies of history, planned to raze the Gothic castle to the ground, to build something more profitable and utilitarian in its place. The irony of fate. The house that bankrupted Twain nearly fell victim to commercial greed itself. It was saved by a group of enthusiasts led by Catherine Seymour Day, the great niece of that very Harriet Beecher Stowe, Twain's neighbor. Women again, now posthumously, saved the writer's legacy, just as his wife Livy did in life. But why should we remember this story today? What is its relevance for us, living in the 21st century, in the era of digital technologies and social networks? The answer is frighteningly simple. Mark Twain was the first modern celebrity, and his house was the first Instagram project, long before the advent of the internet. He built this house not only to live in, but to broadcast an image. He was creating a personal brand, converting his reputation into brick and mortar, trying to prove to the world that he was worth something. Isn't this the same thing that millions of people do today? Buying things they can't afford to impress people they don't know. The story of the house in Hartford is a mirror of our modern culture of success. Twain, investing in the page machine, is the prototype of the modern startup founder who invests everything in risky cryptocurrency or technology, believing he is a visionary, while the market says otherwise. His desire to have the best, most technological house is the precursor to our obsession with smart homes and designer renovations. We look at Twain and see ourselves. We see how easy it is to confuse the external attributes of success with happiness itself. Twain understood this too late. He understood it only when the house was emptied. It was Mark Twain who gave the name to an entire era of American history, the Gilded Age. This was a time when external shine hid internal rot, corruption, and social inequality. And his own house became the perfect metaphor for this term. Outside, magnificent Gothic. Inside, a financial pit and personal tragedy. The gold on the walls, applied by Tiffany, flaked off while debts grew. This is a great reminder that gilding is not gold.
Gilding wears off. Only the essence remains.
If we look at this story through the prism of great literature, we will see a striking parallel with another great American novel, The Great Gatsby. Samuel Clemens was the J. Gatsby of his time. He too came from nowhere. He too built a castle to win love and recognition. He too threw parties hoping to fill an inner void. And, just like Gatsby's, his dream was poisoned by reality. The house that was supposed to become a symbol of his triumph became a mausoleum of his hopes. But there is one important difference. Gatsby died, leaving nothing behind. Twain, having passed through the crucible of loss, transformed his pain into art that outlived both himself and his house. When you stand in the library of this house today, try to listen. The silence here is special. It is not the silence of emptiness, but the silence after the storm. You will not find ghosts and white sheets here, but you will feel the weight of unspoken words and unfulfilled hopes. This house teaches us that true legacy is not square meters or antique furniture. Legacy is how we cope with the blows of fate. Twain lost this house, but he preserved himself. He paid his debts of honor. He survived the death of his daughter and continued to write. The house in Hartford stands today as a beacon. It warns us of the danger of materialism that disguises itself as a dream. It reminds us that walls cannot hold those we love, and that no architectural masterpiece can replace the warmth of human hands. But at the same time, it celebrates the power of the human spirit. After all, despite all the tragedies, it was here that pages were written that have made the world laugh for a century and a half. Samuel Clemens departed into eternity, leaving us not only his books, but also this strange, beautiful, tragic house ship sailing through time. It reminds us that life is not what we accumulate, but what we are willing to give. And perhaps, when you step out of this house onto the sunny street of modern Hartford, you will look at your own home with different eyes. You will ask yourself, am I building a fortress for my ego, or a hearth for my soul? And this question is the most valuable souvenir one can take from Mark Twain's house.